Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues. With this video, I'll be discussing my thoughts on episode 10 of the anime series, Death Parade. And let me just start off by saying, after last week's just incredible intensity, which took me the whole weekend after that episode to kind of come down off, this episode was a little bit more refreshing in that it's somewhat calmer, I guess you could say, much more subdued, but without any less intrigue by the end of the episode. To do, of course, with Onna, whose real name we find out in this episode is Chiyuki. And it's, quite a compelling, sort of twisty-turny element to the story that we're finding out in this episode. Basically, Decim has finally gotten to the point where Onna's words have gotten through to him. He's actually taken to tracking down Nona, go into her sort of special area in this Quin Decim realm, and approach her face-to-face about not feeling right, per the words of Onna, in the previous episode, about this judgment that they do. Are they, he asks her, really trying to observe the darkness contained within these humans whose souls are up for arbitration, or are they provoking that darkness? And that's very much where we were left with that previous episode. You had the kid, basically this darkness that was in him, he was willing to recoil from, and Onna's words were affecting him in a sort of positive light, but then you had that monster of a detective provoking even further that darkness, and that really is what was called into question by Decim. And you have Nona, very interestingly, almost throwing his words back at him to point out the fact that he still has not judged Onna. Should it be left to Nona? Should she remove Decim's right to be the one to, arbitrate essentially Onna's soul and all this stuff? And he makes a fist when she's sort of throwing this dialogue at him, which implies, at least to me, that he really feels some sort of personal connection to Onna, and this is why it's been so hard for him to judge her. Whether there's a romance thing going on, or whether it's an attraction to the human emotions that are on display, by the end of this episode, he kind of comes to that culmination of ideas that this arbitration, this judgment of souls, is kind of incomplete without the human quotient. Something going all the way back to when the series began, I said that was Onna's role, or at least what I speculated it was meant to be in this series. Onna was meant to represent, the human equivalent in the cold logic, sort of the dynamic between those two characters of Decim and Onna. The contrast, if you will, and it comes into question because Decim now understands Onna is aware she is dead. Onna is aware of her position in this whole framework because the skin under her, like bracelets falling off, revealing like sort of dummy plastic underneath. And with that threat, for lack of a better term, of Nona's, her time is coming. Are you going to judge her, or should I do it for you? It totally hangs in the balance, the future of Onna, her soul. What's going to happen with the arbitration and all this, the ramifications of that are tantamount in this episode. And then Nona decides, well, I'll tell you what, let's try to help you along, Decim. I'm going to send you what she calls a special guest. And I'm wondering, why is this particular guest so special? Based on the PV from the previous episode for this episode, they were sort of calling back on that book Chavot, and, it's even up in question in this episode as you meet the old lady. I thought perhaps she was the writer, creator, or illustrator of that Chavot storybook, and I think it remains to be seen, even though she says that she wasn't in this episode. I mean, it could have been like maybe she was the writer of the book, and she wanted to kind of deny it because didn't want people going all nutso in her face, that kind of thing. Or maybe it was, she was true to the word that this was a book she too grew up with, much as, Onna did. But I found it interesting, the sort of dynamic between Onna and this old lady. It's kind of very similar. I mean, basically, Decim has to judge this old lady without any of the memories in tow, as he usually does with these souls that come in for arbitration. He has selected memories that are sent to him through characters like Quinn and, Castor and such like that. And in this particular event, much like he has to be faced with, arbitrating Onna's soul, he has nothing that he's willing to go on. He's kind of judging Onna's character in the moment without the memories. He's kind of having to do that with this old lady in the moment. is that what Nona meant by her being a sort of special guest? Because Decim would have to kind of go off the seat of his pants or something like that. I'm not exactly sure. You know, like I say, when they first referred to her as a special guest, I'm like, oh, maybe she's the writer of this book. Maybe it'll be a personal connection between Ona and her for that reason and all this kind of stuff. And I have to keep wondering, because that seems to not actually have been the case per the old lady's dialogue, denying that fact that she actually wrote or illustrated the book. We do find she is an illustrator, so I still think there could be, you know, room enough for that to be proven true later on. But I do think it's interesting that, once again, the Chevo book comes into play. For a long time, going all the way back to the start of the series, I've been kind of sharing in the fan speculation that the dynamic between the characters of the Chevo book, Jimmy and Chevo, respectively, could be sort of allegories for Decim and Ona. But I've also now begun to suspect and wonder, by the events in this episode, and even the previous couple, could it be more an allegory for Nona and Decim? Because we start this episode finding Decim awaking much as Ona did in this environment that, you know, Nona has sort of off to her own, her house in this, you know, very sort of robust field of flowers and all these kinds of things, set off to the side from the rest of this Quindecim environment. And the first sort of questions out of his mouth is, who am I? Where am I? And rather than, you know, sort of the enigmatic words that she would give to Ona in that position, going all the way back to the start, she's telling Decim right off the bat that he's an arbitrator, he's going to be arbitrating souls, and, you know, it's very sort of interesting to me the way they show her character as she's explaining those things to him, the emphasis in this series of Nona giving, you know, human emotions to Decim. And of course you have Oculus, who is very much suspicious because Nona has just been avoiding him every step of the way. We're seeing Nona is going to the effect of bribing characters like Castra and Quinn in this episode. You know, Castra in a previous. She goes to Quinn looking for Ona's memories, and she wants them all. She wants them to be fitted back together for whatever purpose she has, whatever the impetus behind her manipulating Decim is. And it feels like that could be a very personal connection. Could it be, as I say, that the allegory is there might be some emotions between Nona and Decim? Could they have been brother and sister? Could they have been lovers? You know, could it be that Decim was someone special to her and she kind of broke the rules and turned him into an arbitrator, and it just hasn't been working? And so, as a last resort to try to reclaim whoever he was originally, she put, you know, emotions into him. These are the kinds of things that are going through my head, because you have Oculus calling in Clavis after Clavis has been privy to all of this, you know, dialogue back and forth behind the scenes of Nona and Quinn and getting Ona's memories back and all this kind of stuff. He's been the fly on the wall. And why is that? Did he just happen to be there, or is he, unbeknownst to his own self, working for Oculus? Doesn't really matter by the end, because Oculus's little beard thing comes out, sucks his head, and finds out all of the memories, all of the events that happened with Nona, even events that he wasn't there seemingly to witness necessarily. And he, you know, basically you have Oculus by the end wiping Clavis's mind and sending him off and being like, this is so pointless, Nona. What you're doing is so pointless. What the hell? You know, and that's kind of where they leave it, with this question unanswered. What exactly is Nona doing this for? What is the next step going to be for the judging of Ona's soul? Will Decim finally get to the point where he can bring himself to do so, either send her into the void or send her into reincarnation? And I like that we had sort of more dialogue interplay, setting up that we're going to have a little more emphasis of the characters of Ginty and Mayu in the next episode, per the preview. You know, we have Decim going to Ginty, and they're argumentative once again, and you have, of course, Mayu in the background snoring and sleeping and just being absolutely cute as hell, and sort of giving some levity to an already somewhat intense scene. But by the end, the revelations that come forth in this episode through that card game of Old Maid, you know, this is how Ona realizes her real name is Chiyuki. She remembers back to her mother. You know, she's begging her mother to read her this Chevo book. It's a book that is a shared memory and bond between Ona and this old lady. And so it's like, we have so much more progression, and yet there's still so many questions hanging in the balance by the end that I am just stoked. I love this series. I cannot overstate my love and passion for this series. It is, as I continue to say, every video, a work of art unfolding before our eyes, and it just has me piqued of being compelled, you know, as far as wondering what is going to happen. Is Decim going to have to, you know, arbitrate and judge Ona's soul? Will she have to be sent on? Why is Nona so, you know, obsessed with creating emotions within Decim, or calling something more human out of him? And, you know, why is she willing to risk her own position going against a, you know, self-professed god like Oculus? And now Oculus knows, his suspicions confirm that she's up to something. It's just got me pricked at the edge of my seat to see where we're going to go next. So I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below if you've been watching this series. What did you make of this episode? You know, was it as compelling and riveting to you? Did you consider maybe a letdown after the intensity of the previous week's episode? All that kind of good stuff in the comments below. Let me know what you thought of it. And yeah, that'll be pretty much it for me on this. Otherwise, and I hope this video finds you well, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.